So you know both sides here. Is this simply something to be expected, a little blip along the process to an agreement, or is there something more fundamental going on here?
Well, in every one of the major trade agreements that we have with the Chinese, there was always a crisis right before the end. And so in that sense, it's not a surprise. But I do think what is a surprise is the extent of what we're hearing the changes are to the text. I mean, in good faith, Secretaries Mnuchin and USTR Lighthizer were in China negotiating what is almost 160 pages. And if the Chinese are taking significant portions of that off the table at this last minute, that's real reason to be concerned.
It's not the first time in these negotiations that's been reported, that Mr. Lighthizer, Ambassador Lighthizer, thought he had a deal. They went around and put it to paper, and then it came back and said, this is not the deal we made. Is that a Chinese negotiating tactic, or is that reflecting something more fundamental that maybe the Chinese government might have trouble delivering on what Mr. Lehr is negotiating?
Right. I think it's a combination of the two. One, there are opposing forces and very strong vested interests in China who are trying to counter some of the opening that's going on. There's a lot of money at stake, particularly for some of the state-owned enterprises and some of the bureaucratic control that's going on there. But for the administration, it really is important that they continue to push to break down some of those barriers, because it really is the only way that we'll start to see true market access for U.S. companies. And I think there's a credibility issue at stake here. Lehr has to come and show that he can actually deliver on the commitments that he's made to the United States.
How does he do that? I mean, has he lost the confidence of the people he's negotiating with? Because as you know, in a negotiation, if that happens, that's trouble. How does he gain that back in essentially 48 hours? Yeah,
it's real trouble if you don't have confidence that your counterpart can deliver. And I think it's not just about the vice premier. It's really ensuring that we understand as the United States, there's a commitment from the top in China that they not only can make these commitments, but they're able to implement and enforce them. And that's going to be critical. And the vice premier is going to have to demonstrate that. And part of it's going to be through the package that he comes with when he arrives here in Washington.
So is this too big a deal to fail? To borrow a chapter from the banks, because we hear that now. We hear that from people up on Capitol Hill. We hear it from former administration officials. It's such an important deal for both sides. They're going to have to get it done somehow. Or is that wrong? Could it go sideways?
Well, I think it certainly is an important deal, both in terms of the content, because the timing is we have to have increased market access. We have to change the structural relationship that we have on trade with China, no question. But psychologically, also, it's a very important one. I mean, we already see the reaction of the markets just at the hint that it might not be taking place. You know, I'm always cautiously optimistic that the two sides can come to this. It may just not be on the timetable that we have been expecting and thinking that we could get this done in the next month. Maybe it drags out a little bit longer.
What do you make of this distinction between a law and a regulation? Because we're hearing our reporting of Bloomberg basically is going sideways in part based on the fact that we thought it'd be on the law and they're saying it's a regulation. Is that a real difference?
You know, obviously, there's a big difference between how the United States looks at capturing things in law and how China does. In China, laws tend to be very general and very vague, and they're left to interpretation at many different levels. First, they're implementing regulations that are put out by the central government that define the law, and then each of the provinces and municipalities put out their own interpretation. And so you can actually get very different interpretations of the commitments that are made. So in whatever form it takes, it's really important that the United States have a very clear commitment, whether it's in the law or in the implementing regulation.